Okay, no introduction. Just going to jump right into it. So, Doechii had a Hot Ones Q&A with Miss Milan, and they were asking questions back and forth. And one of the questions asked to Doechii was what her red flag was for dating. And her response was straight men. I believe she said something along the lines of like, maybe I'm quoting here, like, I mean, strike one, you're a man and you're heterosexual, right? So straight men seems to be a red flag for Doechii. Okay. Now, I want to be clear about something. I personally don't care what Doechii says, in the sense that her view is her view. And, she has preferences and she has her own history in dating and she has her own red flags. And this just happens to be hers, right? If anything, it just made me a little bit more curious, like, oh, what were her experience like? As anybody who's having a conversation with somebody might want to ask if they're actually trying to get to understand the other person and to find out, like, oh, why is this a red flag for you? What has your experience been that this is serving as a red flag? But that's just my response. What did fascinate me, because those of you who know me know I just don't honestly care what most other people think. What did fascinate me, though, was the range of responses that came flooding in after her interview, right? Some people responded with, well, this is just nothing, who cares, like I did, right? This is just her personal preferences. Others, interestingly, took it as a joke of some kind, although I don't see where the joke is. In fact, if you watch the video, she seems to just report it fairly matter of factly. And so, some people thought because it was a joke that it was nothing to get worked over, like get over it. Sounds kind of dismissive to me, but that was some of the responses. Others responded with a little bit more curiosity and wanted to find out exactly why she responded in the way that she did. And some people just didn't know that she identifies as queer and bisexual. So they, might have wanted to find out about her own history. Others actually use that knowledge that she does identify as bisexual and queer and use it as a way to make sense of her response, that her response was just simply to say that she just wants to be with other queer people or something along these lines, right? I don't know how you would know that that's what she meant because there was nothing in the interview that actually said it, but okay, neither here nor there. Seems like a lot of people were responding and adding a lot of things into the to the interview that wasn't actually at least explicitly there. So there, a lot of people seem to be reading into it. Now, I personally was most interested in I think a larger portion of the responses, at least in social media. And this is part of the reason I hate social media. But, there's a large number of people who seem to have taken offense with her statement as some sort of attack on straight men, right? So they took her statement that her red flag is straight men to respond with, so what's wrong with straight men? Are you saying that straight men are a problem, that they're awful people? And many of them started claiming that that Doechii is going to lose a chunk of her audience, that a lot of people who once supported her will no longer support her because they feel personally attacked or insulted, being identifying as a straight male or straight man. Okay. All right. So I want to talk about the backlash. I don't care about Doechii's actual response. I think there was nothing to her response. It's more the responses that are really fascinating. Okay, so looking at the people who are offended. I mean, I understand that you are offended. I will acknowledge that, right? But the question here is, why were you offended, right? Why, instead of being curious about her claims, wanting to know more about why she felt that way, why is it that you automatically went to the realm of you're attacking straight men? This is not a good thing to do. This is insulting. This is demeaning. It's disrespectful. Why did you jump into that realm so quickly? Okay. Now, look, I'm not going to play armchair psychologist here. I'm not going to try to assume that I know what it is that any of these people are thinking or feeling. I'm not going to assume anything about what Doechii meant. I think this is where a lot of the responses have gone wrong, is that people start assuming, this is what Doechii meant when, there's nothing, I mean, there's no follow-up question here. There was nothing, added to her discussion that indicated what she actually believed in her response or what she meant by her response, right? I don't know either. So, I'm not going to try to pretend I do, okay? I just know what the reactions are, right? So I know that some people were offended. A lot of people felt that it was an insult to straight men. to claim that's a red flag. And I can see where they're coming from because red flags usually indicate that it's something that is wrong, right? And at least for the person who claims it's a red flag for them, that it's something that they are going to, be cautious of, that they don't want to engage with people of that kind, right? For whatever reason. It might be their own personal experience, it might just be their general views of people with those qualities. But red flags are often seen as a bad thing, right? We don't say like red flags, like, yay, let's go date somebody with all these red flags, right? So I could understand where it's coming from to some degree. Um, and I'm even going to go one step further. Let's just assume, for the sake of argument, that she actually genuinely believes that straight men are a red flag in the sense that straight men are a problem, right? As in dating life, for her, she thinks that with straight men, you need to be kind of cautious or be a little bit hesitant to date them because they are straight men. Okay. So the question I have is this: those of you who are getting all worked up over Doechii's comments, why are you offended? Why are you getting so defensive? And don't start here by claiming that you're not defensive, because that just sounds honestly defensive. The fact that you're offended and you're getting worked up and you feel a need to comment on social media, that you are expressing how you're feeling, you're clearly offended. You clearly are wanting to defend straight men or yourself. I'm not sure what, right? But I'm asking you this in all honesty because my guess is you know the reality. You're not going to be dating Doechii, right? You're not even going to meet her at any point, I'm guessing, right? And, you know, maybe you're a fan and you feel like she owes you something to consider like straight men to be, I don't know, great or something in order for you to support an artist. Maybe that's what it is. I'm not sure exactly what, right? But what's clear is that you have no personal relationships or connections to Doechii, right? And you still seem to have taken some issue with her comments. So I want to just sit for a second with your reaction. And I want to sit with your reaction for a reason. It's because, at least from my experience, I think that your reaction might actually reveal why straight men are a red flag. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that all people who are offended were straight men, right? I saw comments and, people going after Doechii that were not straight men. It was women, it was people who identify in all different ways, right? I'm not going to speak on all of them. What I do know is that there is something to the idea that straight men, on the whole, I'm not talking about any particular individual, but straight men on the whole, maybe it's because of culturally what is or isn't accepted, right? I don't know about individual personal history, like I said, but at least generally culturally, right? Straight men often tend to be a certain way. And I mean, there's even research that kind of bears this out. Let me kind of just point to an anecdote, or actually just an SNL episode. There was a whole SNL skit where Bowen Yang and who was it? I think it was like Travis Kelsey were doing this whole skit about being friends with a straight male, right? So Bowen Yang is talking about how he loves his girlfriends, but sometimes he needs a break from all that because it's emotionally very, you have to invest a lot emotionally and financially. But with straight men, things come kind of easy. You don't have to be emotionally invested. And in the skit, if you go and watch it, right, you look at the conversations and the kind of conversations they have. They don't talk about anything personal. In fact, I think Travis Kelsey was saying something like, I'm sorry for talking about my dad dying. I won't be like that again, right? Apologizing for expressing feelings, right? And it works as a joke in part because there's some truth to it, right? I'm speaking from my own experiences. Like, most of the men in my life tend to be terrible at identifying and expressing their feelings. I'm probably one of the few men that I know of like that actually go to therapy regularly and have reflected on my own feelings and my often inability to kind of express myself in an accurate way, right? Or lashing out at people because I didn't understand what was really behind it. This is actually a fairly common experience for a lot of men. And I say that the research bears it out because one of the major issues with men is that, at least according to research, anyways, is that there's a disproportionate number of men who end up being depressed, suffer from loneliness, and commit suicide. This is an actual real problem for men, and at the root of a lot of this, in part, anyways, in large part, I would say, is that men have a terrible time identifying, sitting with their feelings, acknowledging their feelings, expressing their feelings, learning how to deal with their feelings in a healthy way. These are things that affect men generally, but I think it actually affects like straight men probably more than anything, right? Straight male culture is very different than, the gay or, queer community, in what is kind of acceptable for men in those spaces to actually do, right? So I'm pointing all of this out because, again, individually, it might not apply to you. But you're also kind of living under a rock and not acknowledging reality if you think that there's not a general issue with men across the board, and specifically with straight men, right? And one of the things that comes out from straight men, something about the culture, is that oftentimes they get very defensive. They get very, how do you say this? They take it personally when things are not personal, right? So if somebody makes a comment about men generally, not the individual, but men generally, many of them will take it personally as an attack on them specifically, right? Now, I want to be clear, right? I think this is a normal human reaction. I think all humans experience this, right? Children have to kind of learn at an early age and constantly kind of practice this to be able to differentiate between, you know, they're feeling a certain way and other people being wrong for making them feel this way, right? I mean, this is one of the things I learned in therapy, like therapy 101. One of the things I learned was you're responsible for your own feelings, right? Like you need to learn to acknowledge and accept your feelings and not put the responsibility on others for how you feel, right? You feel how you feel because that's just how you feel, right? You can't point to other people and say, you made me feel this way. But I've learned from my own experience that it happens, at least for me, more often with men that they get defensive in this way and take it as a personal slight on them or as my insulting them specifically, right? Now, sometimes I might just be guilty of, implying a little too heavily. And so, like, it makes sense why they would connect the dots in that way, right? But at the same time, sometimes it's just true. And this is why I am so fascinated by the response I've seen. And the reason I'm surprised is I was hoping that at least, not that I expected men to, make major drastic changes in their life to address it in any way or think of it as a problem, but I was surprised that a lot of men do not even like see that, male culture is the way that it is, right? When men get together and some of the behaviors that they engage in, that the fact that they can't understand why others just don't like it, right? Like they think that they find it to be a problem, that they find it to be something that we shouldn't be encouraging people to do, right? Let me give you another example. I mean, I'm guilty of a lot of these, so I'm not trying to like throw other people under the bus and say I'm like better than anybody. I mean, I have had to learn because I was guilty of a lot of this. So I'll just use an example for myself, right? One of the things that I had a hard time doing, especially in married life, but even prior in previous relationships, is to be able to talk openly and to address the other person's feeling in that relationship. And part of the reason I had difficulty doing so was that I would often get wrapped up in my own feelings, right? I would, instead of hearing their concerns or their, anger or frustration with me, instead of actually listening to what it is that they were trying to communicate to me about how they felt, I was quick to focus on my own feelings about their feelings, right? In other words, I saw their feelings as somehow a threat to the relationship or as an indication that they were rejecting me. And so I would get up all up in my own feelings, right? And, you know, now, after years of kind of working on this, I look back on it and say, wow, like there were so many chances where I could have really connected with the other person by listening and empathizing with their feelings, but instead I just completely cut them off, right? I put a barrier between us in our relationship because I was not able to actually hear their heart. I wasn't able to hear how they were feeling. And instead, I was so focused on my own feelings that I just basically ignored everything that they were saying. Or I would end up twisting what they were saying into something about me, right? And how I felt. And, you know, I didn't realize just how much kind of pain and hurt I was causing the other person in that relationship. But upon reflection now, I could actually see like, oh yeah, that makes so much sense why, the person that I was in a relationship with felt so alone and didn't feel like I actually saw them or noticed them or, understood them. Right. I could understand exactly why they felt that way. And it had everything to do with the way that I responded to them. Right. Had everything to do with my response. Okay. But here's the thing, like the way that I was responding, that's how most guys I meet, that's how they respond, right? I've tried with men to be able to have deeper conversations and to talk about feelings, right? Actually have a chat group with college buddies, all dudes, right? Where I try to do this exercise. I found a wonderful set of cars that are being sold. I think it was like a startup somewhere of people doing it out of their home, but a little card game where it's called Friends Are Human 2, and it asks questions that are at a various level, like questions about or the relationship you have with the other person. And I suggested, because we're not like physically next to each other, we can't meet up, as frequently as we would like, that I would put these questions out there for us to answer so that we could really get to know each other. And I see the responses and I'm like, these are not very deep responses. These are kind of like very surface level responses. There's a lack of depth in the responses. And it didn't surprise me, right? And I think this is what's shocking is I feel like it's okay to be like, well, yeah, that's how guys are. And, acknowledge like, yeah, this is something that other people might not necessarily like. To acknowledge it would be great. But what's fascinating is that I think a lot of people just don't even realize that this is something that is detrimental to building relationships, right? Like like you can't have deeper, meaningful relationships unless you're able to go into that space where you understand and learn about the other person and their inner workings and their history and their lives and how that impacted who they are now, right? Until you actually go into that space and are willing to have those deeper, more vulnerable conversations, you're just not going to have a deep connection with that person. You could have a great working relationship. You could have a lot of fun together, right? It's an easy relationship. I mean, this is what the SNL skit is talking about, right? The relationship becomes easier. You're friends, but you're not really, friends in any deep sense. You're friends in the sense that they're always down to hang out. You always have a good time. But then any sort of emotional baggage, you don't go to them to talk about it because one of the reasons is you're not going to feel heard. You're not going to feel understood. They could distract you from whatever you're dealing with, but they're not going to help you work through it. Right. But the fact that people don't see this as a predominantly, again, not exclusively, but a predominantly straight male problem, that's what's fascinating here about the responses. In other words, like the fact that people are getting so defensive is the very thing that I at least would consider a red flag in a relationship, right? That's what I would consider a red flag in a relationship. If somebody gets defensive about something I say about my own preferences, instead of responding with curiosity, you respond with getting defensive about it as if it's an attack on you specifically, is for me a red flag. That itself is the red flag. So I was reading all these responses and I found it to be so funny in some ways because there's just kind of like this lack of awareness about the very thing that you're doing that could at least potentially, like I said, I don't know what Doechii meant by straight men being a red flag. What I can tell you myself is that there's a lot of things that specifically mostly straight men do that I consider to be a red flag, right? If my daughter was dating one of these men, right? I only have one kid and I have a daughter, right? So, if she was going around dating and it doesn't even matter if it was a man, if it was any person who demonstrated this sort of response in response to her expressing her feelings or her preferences, right? Or something that should have been an opening to a deeper, meaningful discussion about personal life experiences, right? If somebody responded with this sort of defensiveness, for me as a parent, I would see that as a red flag. I would see that as a red flag. And I'm not going to lie to myself and then say that this is something that it affects everybody, all humans in the same way. It clearly doesn't. It clearly doesn't. It clearly seems to be an issue that exists mostly with men, mostly with men. And it's backed up by all the data that we see. It is a serious problem, at least in the United States. But I'm imagining, I wouldn't be surprised if this also existed in a lot of other countries where there was a long history of, what is it, of men being touted as like leaders or people who had to be strong and people who had to like not really show their emotions and have a lot of grit, right? Like it wouldn't surprise me if this is a problem in those areas as well, which is, you know, at least from my experience again, and at least backed up with some data, men have a really hard time connecting with other men, other people generally in any deeper way, because there's something about the culture that it gets ingrained in them that they never learn how to be deeper emotionally in relationships. They don't know how to build these deeper connections with other people. And as a result, you're seeing the kind of consequences of it. A lot of lonely men who don't have any deep friendships, who don't turn to other people, friends, in order to talk out whatever they're going through. If they don't have a therapist, then they really don't have any other people to rely on to talk about their feelings. They don't even know how to identify their feelings, right? They can't even tell that they're being triggered or that they are reacting to things in ways that have nothing to do with the thing that they're facing in the first place, like in this Doechii case, right? It's a person you don't know that is just going speaking her mind. Like, why are you getting so worked up? Maybe that's the first place to start. Maybe that's the first place to start. Okay. But I don't know if maybe I'm just seeing the things. I don't know if other people are noticing what it is that I'm noticing. But I find that, and this is just generally on social media, this is what I find is the responses seem to be a lot more telling than the initial thing that led off all these reactions. And in this case, that holds very true for me. In any case, I'd like to know what you think. If you find me on YouTube, please leave comments. I'm curious about other people's thoughts. I've been wanting to have conversations about this because I just find it to be a fascinating social phenomenon. And I'm curious to hear what your experiences have been. And, if you disagree with me, that's fine. I'd like to have a conversation because I want to hear what it is that maybe I'm missing here, because I find this whole thing to be hilarious, but hilarious in a very sad way. And maybe I'm on the wrong track. So if you can show me otherwise, please, I'd like to hear from you. All right, until next time.